Hi everyone. If you're a JavaScript developer, you most likely would have used Console.log, but in this video we would be taking a look at all the JavaScript console method that could be useful to you. So let's get started. So on my IDE, I have not really a blank JavaScript file, but I have actually written a dummy data here. So this is basically the data of some users. So we have the first user and the second user and thereabout. And I'm going to be using this set of data to explain the different kind of console.log that we have. So the very first type is basically console.log, the most common one, which is console.log. So console.log can just pick up a data, like I can just put up a string here and say this is a text, and if I should save this, you can see that this particular text here is being written into the console. And I can also assign a variable into this. So this particular variable of user, that's the constant, I can just say here we have users, and when I save this, we can see that this has been printed upon our console, and I can also expand that, and we have all this data over here. So this is the very basic stuff. And I also would like to say that we can also assign a label to this by assigning a string over here. So we can say this is a label, and let me just do this over here. So when I save this, I have this label over here, and I have the original value. So this could actually help us to identify between different consoles. For example, if I should have another console.log over here, I can say this is label 2, and it just helps us to identify which console is which console. So that is just what this actually does. But these are pretty basic stuff. So let's move over to the interesting stuff. So the first stuff I would like to talk about here is the first console method I would like to talk about here is the console.count. So the console.count works this way. First of all, to explain that, I have to loop through this item. So I would say for, and I'm going to say const, let's say const user of users. So let's go this way, and I'll say this. So this is const, I meant to say const. So when we say const users of users, I then would say console.count. And in this case, I am just going to add a label to this, and I will call this user. And if I should save this over here, you can see that we have this particular user object being counted, and we have user 1, user 2, user 3, up to user 10. So this actually tells us that there are actually 10 users in this particular array, and that's what the console.count does. But if we decide not to add a label to this, it's just going to use the default over there, and it's going to say default 1, default 2. So that's why it's very important for you to put a label so that you'll be able to identify what exactly you are counting. So talking about the console.count, we also have the count reset as well. So let me call this user again. And at this point, I can also come over here and add more console.count over here. Not this way. So I would say console.count and then duplicate this across multiple lines. So now you can see that the console.line really doesn't stop at 10 anymore. It goes down to 11 down to 18. But I actually want to reset this console over here. So I could say console.reset, and I am resetting user. I'm actually resetting the count at this point. And when I go, you can see it stops at 10 and it starts counting from 1 again. So that's basically the usefulness of the console.count reset. So let's go on, and I would save this now. And there is another example that I can go on to explain over here. So that is actually console.group. So console.group basically helps us to group different things that have been that have been written into our console. So in this case, I'm going to say that console.group, and I am going to come over here to say console.groupEnd. So I would say GroupEnd in this case. So if you observe, you can just take this like 5 seconds backwards to see the difference. We never had this console.group initially, and now that we added the console.group here, we can then collapse all these things that we have here into a more compact version, and this actually helps us to be able to keep our console neater. But this is not really useful if it's just opened this way. So we can also have another one called Console.groupCollapsed. So what Console.groupCollapsed does is that it collapses this particular console by default. So if I should save this over here, we can see that we have Console.groupCollapsed, and by default, this is actually collapsed until we decide to open this particular set of console. But if I should end the Console.group over here, if I should end this over here, let's say I cut this and I then place this somewhere around here. Let's watch what's going to happen. So you can see that at this point, I only have this set of data being grouped, while this other set of data are not really part of the group here. So another thing we can do for both the Console.group and Console.groupCollapsed is to give it a label. So in this case, I can say that I can just call the sample as a label, and we can see that I have my sample data here. And when I expand it, I have this group, and I can also create another group here for the second one, and I could say Console.groupCollapsed. I'm going to use group collapse because I prefer that, and I would say sample2 as my label, and I'm going to have to end that over here by say Console.group.end. So if I should save this now, you can say I have two groups here, which is the sample and also the sample2 being splitted into different groups. Also have it in mind that we can also have nested groups within a Console.group. So I'm going to cut this over here, and I will place this here to have a kind of a nested group. If I should save this now, you can see we have just one sample, and when we expand it, we have another group as a child group underneath it, which is called sample2. So this is just all about the Console.group. The next item that we will be talking about is the Console.time. So for the Console.time, I'm going to say Console.time. This actually helps us to be able to know how long a particular function runs, or how long does it take our code to execute from a specific line to another point in the code. So I'm going to say Console.time over here, and I'm going to place it somewhere here, Console.timeEnd, to identify the place where I want to record the time to. So I'm going to say Console.timeEnd. So I'm going to stop this over here. And when I save this, if I should expand this group, because of this is still within the group, you can see that it's not really visible initially. And when I open it, I could see default is equal to 2.36 blah 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 milliseconds. So we have that over there. And just like the Console.group, we can also give the Console.time a label. So I'm going to say time so far, and I'm just going to save that. And when we expand this, we could say we have time so far. And mind you, when we are using the Console.time, we also need to end that with the exact label that we used to start it. So it's going to know what's time counting are we supposed to end here. So when I save this now and I expand this, you can see time so far is actually 2.1 milliseconds over there. So I'm going to take this up to the upper position and take this down to the lower position, because I don't want my Console.time to be within the group anymore. So right now, the Console.time is out of the group, and I'm just going to leave it there in that way. But there's still one more thing concerning the Console.time. Let's say that I want to know at what time does each of this loop get executed. So I could say that Console.timeLoop. So I can use the time log for that, I meant to say. So I'm going to say Console.timeLog, and I'm going to give that the same label as this. And if I should place that over here and save this now, when I open this, you could see time so far, as at the time it wrote the user1 was this, as at the time it wrote the user2, this was the time. When it wrote the user3, this was the time. So I am logging each of the time the iteration of this for loop got written over here on the console. So that's basically it about the time loop. Now, another very useful thing I would like to talk about the console method is the Console.dir, that's dir. But to explain that, I have to comment this. and I'll go over to my HTML to uncomment this thing that I have written over here. So this is basically a file input, and I give this an ID of file selector. So at this point in time, to explain the Console.dir, I'm going to assign a variable over here. I will call this file selector should be equal to documents. So say document get element by ID. Okay, I did add that get element by ID. So I'm going to add this over there and do this. So at this point, I'm going to say Console.dir. So the Console.dir is not really like the Console.log because this gives us more detail. If I should say Console.log in this case, and I should say I want to Console.log my file selector, this is what we have over here. You can see it's just giving us the basic input, which is this, and it's just printing it out here. But if I should say Console.dir, and it's going to give me more details about this particular input. And if I should expand this, we can see we have more detail about this. We have even the CSS styling is here. If we should move down to the styles, we could see the default styles of this particular stuff over here. We could see the source. We can even see the file over here. So we can see the set of files that have been selected, but right now we've not selected any file. And I would like to demonstrate that for you to tell you how useful this could be. So I am going to say on change, I want to call this method select file. So let's call this select file, and we have this over here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to create this method over here. So I'm going to say function select file, and I'm going to wrap this into this function. So I'll cut this over here, paste it here just once. Okay, so when I save that now, whenever I go ahead to select a file and I select the specific file, we can see we have the file input here. And when I expand this, I move over to the place where we have the file. You can see we have this file length is equal to 1. But if we should go ahead to expand this now, we can now see that we have one file. Here, if we should expand this, we have the name of the file, which is this, the date it was last modified. So this is actually the timestamp of the file we've just selected. Why this is the size of the file, and this is the last date it was modified. So we have a whole lot of information over here just using the Console.dir to do this. But if we should say we should use the Console.log, for example, we use the Console.log, we are not really going to have so much information. Let's try that again, and we can see that we're just having the file inputs over here. So this is actually a very good use case of the Console.dir over here. So let's save this and let's move over to the next one. So the next thing I'd like to talk about here would be the Console.table. So to talk about the Console.table, I'm going to be using the same user object I've been using before. So I would say Console.table user. So I'm going to say user, user meant to say, and if I should save that now, you can see that we have a table over here. So I'm just going to try to expand this a bit so we can have a clearer view of what this is all about. So we can see that we have a good representation, a good table representation of the user data that we have over here. Of all this data, we have a good tabular representation of it. And this looks much more like a structured database kind of thing, whereby we have the ID of each of them. So this is what we're referring to as the ID. We can see that this has the ID of 1. If we should move over to the next object, this has the ID of 2, and so on. So we have the name, the username, and over here you can see we have the address and also the company name. Now this is a situation whereby Console.table may not really be useful, and that's a situation whereby we are having a nested object. So whenever we're having a nested object, the table will not really display the contents of the nested object, and I'm going to show you what that means in a jiffy. So let's take a look at this now. we have this particular user over here, and this user has an address and company. But the address and company are both nested objects. Let me expand this again. So the address and company are both nested objects, and we can see that we have more data here, and we also have more data here. So for some reasons, the console.table really did not know how to display the nested object, and that's why it's just stating that this is an object over here. So you probably would not want to use console.table for any array of objects that is having a kind of a nested object within it. So that is just it concerning that. Another thing we need to know about the console.table is that we can actually sort each of this by the ID. So we can come here, click on it, it's going to sort in ascending or descending order. We can actually sort any of the columns by username or by any of the keys that we basically have here. So we can also resize this. Let's say this ID is taking a whole lot of space and we want to see the full name of each of the stuff. So each of these things can actually be resized, given the ID a smaller column. And since the address is not really showing much, we can just decide to minimize that and also to minimize this, which would give us more room to see more useful data. Same up goes to the index. We don't really have much for the index, so I can just basically adjust these things, whichever in any way I feel like adjusting them. So that's it on the console.table, and really this is one of my favorite console method that is really available, the console.table, because it just gives us nice data representation in a tabular form. So this is actually one that you should try. And if you're really using Console.table every day while you're debugging, please let me know down in the comment box. So let's go on to the next one. The next thing that we would want to talk about here would be the Console.warn. So the Console.warn is pretty straightforward. I just want to minimize this now. Okay, so the Console.warn is pretty straightforward. Before I'm going to talk about the Console.warn, I wanted to display this data set like a Console.dir. Let's see. So when we try to display this data set as a Console.dir, we can see that it's Console.dir actually gives us the type of object that this is, which is actually an array. So if we use Console.log over here, we can see that Console.log just gives us this, and it's not really telling us if it's an array or if it's an object or anything. It's not really giving us those extra information for the Console.log, but it's just logging out all the information that we have over there. But for the Console.dir, it actually states the type of this particular data set, that it is an array. And it's not just an array, but it is an array that has 10 items within it. So when we expand this now, we can see the 10 items that we have ranging from index 0 to index 9. And if we should expand one of it, now we can see those things that the console.table would not really show to us. So that is concerning the address and the company. So we can see them. When we expand it, we can see the city, the geo location, that's a longitude and latitude. We can even expand that to have more information of the geolocation. So if you know you're going to be dealing with nested objects, then I want to say Console.log, Console.dir might be the best way to go. But if you just have a flat data set, like a flat array of objects that you want to display, then I think Console.table would be your best bet on that. So let's move over to the next one. The next one that we have over here is, I'm just going to change this to table again. So I'm going to save this. The next one we have here is Console.warn. So what Console.warn does is very, very similar with to Console.log, but I'm just going to show you the difference instead of to talk around it. So first I'm going to say users. I'm going to be using users for this, and if I should save this now, we can see that we have this over here. So we have the entire user array of objects being printed out here. And the special thing about the Console.warn is that it gives us this kind of color to tell us that this is not a regular console. This is a warning. And it also gives us this icon over here that says caution, like there's a caution sign, and it's kind of warning you that something might probably go wrong if we continue with this or something. So you use Console.warn when you're trying to pass a warning to to the user or to the developer, as the case may be. Let's say, for instance, the developer is for some reason not really checking the type, and you want to inform the developer that you're not really checking the type of your data. You might just want to use Console.warn for that, because it's not really going to cause any breaking change, but at a long run, it might cause a runtime error, and you want to pass such information. Console.warn is usually the best thing to use for that. So aside from discussion icon and the color over here, we also have this extra icon here. And to prove that, I'm going to change this to Console.log, and you will observe that you are not going to see this extra icon. So if I should refresh this now, you can see that we only have the arrow to toggle the Console.log up and down. But when we change this back to Console.warn, you can see we're having a double icon. So this first icon actually is not really doing much. It's just really telling us exactly where our console is being triggered from. So if we should click on this now, we could see it's just taking us directly to the part where we have the Console.warn. So that's just it about that particular arrow. And I honestly don't really see that to be very useful, in all honesty, because in our Console.log here, we also have this, which can still take us right down to the place where that code is being executing from. So I really don't see that arrow to be very useful, but I just want to inform you that such a thing is there anyways. So the next thing I will change this back to Console.warn. The next thing we want to take a look at here now is Console.error. So I would say Console.error, and I'm still going to use the users in this case. So Console.error, unlike the Console.log, you can see them side by side. They just have difference with the colors. We have the Console.error having this dark red color, and we can see this kind of, should I say, cancel icon or not allowed icon. So that's just basically the difference. They both have this double arrow, and when we click on it, it's same functionality. It takes us straight to the place where that particular code is executed from. And if we should go back to the console, we can also still access that by clicking on this part over here. So that is pretty much it on the Console.warn and the Console.error. So one other thing I would like to talk about is in a situation whereby we have so many consoles and we want to clear the whole data that we are having because of the so many consoles that we have now. Okay, I think I'm just going to go back to this place, remove this unchanged method. I just want a situation whereby I'm going to have so many consoles here, so I'll be able to explain this better. I'm going to save this now, and I would remove this method, or better still, I'm just going to comment it out. I'm going to comment this out so that this would be executed. So I would do this, enable this, and if I should save this, we would see that we have so many consoles here. And when I expand this, or rather, I'll just say console.group, so this would not collapse. So I will say console.group. So when I say console.group now, you can see that we have so many things over here. I just need more things. Okay, I think this is actually good enough. So what if I want to clear the entire of my console? Like, I have actually consoled so many data, and it's kind of so much right now on our developer tool. What will I do to clear this up? So the first thing you need to know is that if you want to clear your console, you can always click on this button and everything will disappear. And basically, that's the way I clear my console every day, basically. But in a situation whereby you want to clear your console programmatically, like you want to clear it without clicking on this button, you want to write a code to clear your console. How do you go about that? So first off, the disadvantage of doing this is that when you refresh your screen, they come back. If you clear, you refresh, they come back. But if you should do this by saying console.clear, so, and I save this now, you observe that the entire console is being cleared. All these other things that are being executed, like they're actually being written into the console, but console.clear takes everything out of the console, and it gives us this last message saying console was cleared. So that's just basically how the console.clear works. And to prove this, I'm just going to take the console.clear out of here. I'm going to cut it out of here, and I'm going to put here. So what are you expecting? So the console.clear is going to clear everything from this part upwards, but everything from after the console.clear downwards is still going to be written to the console. So let me save this to see it execute, to see it in action. So here we can see that we have console was cleared at this particular point. So it means it clears everything at the top, but everything at the bottom is still be written to the console because it cannot really clear what is beneath this particular line of code. So this is pretty much how the console.clear works. So let's just have a recap about it on this. We talked about the console.time, console.group. We talked about the console.count, count.reset. We talked about the group collapse as well. We talked about the Console.table, which I said is one of my favorites. I think you should try that actually. We talked about the Console.dir, dir or dir. I'm fond of calling that the Console.dir. So we talk about the Console.dir, which I think is very, very useful. I also use this a whole lot every day. So the Console.dir can literally replace your Console.log. Like whenever you want to do Console.log, just do Console.dir, and I think you're going to get much value from what you were doing already. So let's just say this is pretty much what we have to cover today based on the JavaScript console method. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give this a like, a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. Click the subscription button down below. I'll see you all in another video. Thanks for watching.